Welcome back. NASA's Artemis One is scheduled to take off this coming Saturday as part one of an extensive mission to eventually establish a long-term human presence on the moon in the decades ahead. For more on this, I have Professor Paul Yun from Camino College here in the studio, who's also NASA's Solar System Ambassador. Professor Yun, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Good to see you.
I also have Doctor Kang Sung-Ju from Gwacheon National Science Museum here in the studio with us. Dr. Kang, it's good to have you here with us as well.
Thank you for having me here. Thanks.
Professor Yun, we'll start with you then. Let's begin with a few words on the Artemis program itself. How did it start? Who is involved? What is its ultimate purpose?
Yeah, that's a good question. So NASA initiated the Artemis program 2017. Currently, there are 21 countries are participating, which are signing Artemis Accord. And definitely one of the countries is Republic of Korea.
Right.
So the purpose, as you mentioned, the purpose of Artemis program is making possible to the long-term human presence on the surface of the moon. And also through the mission, we are trying to achieve, understand science discovery on the moon. And also we try to find out economical benefit through the lunar missions. And also we try to inspire young generations.
Right, it's a very ambitious project then. Dr. Kang, South Korea for its part, as Professor Yun mentioned, signed the Artemis Accords back in May last year. Do tell us a bit about these accords themselves, and as a scholar, what are your thoughts on such joint efforts to, for moon missions?
Artemis program is not just limited to the lunar exploration, but will be a stepping stone for the deep space exploration for the future. So NASA aims to create the new technology and systems for space development, such as deep space exploration. The Artemis Accord covered the peaceful usage of the space and mutual rescue in case of the emergency, and the utilization of the space resources and the prevention of the conflict, and so on. Thus, signing the Artemis Accords might be seen as a consenting to a new framework if the space exploration led by the United States.
Right, and before we get into that, Professor Yun, perhaps the most recent mission to the moon was launched by South Korea back in August 4th. I'm talking about Danuri.
Yeah.
I understand one of Danuri's tasks is related to the Artemis program. Do you care to elaborate?
Yeah, so the Danuri, the Korean Pathfinder lunar orbiter, so it's going to orbit around the moon approximately a year. And it has a 6 payload. 5 of them are made by the Korea's university and then research institutions. And then, as you mentioned, one of them is NASA's payload named ShadowCam, which will survey the possibility of presence of the water ice deposit in the permanent shadow regions near the lunar poles. So I think the data collected by ShadowCam and the other 5 payloads, I think we'll have a better understanding how to prepare our Artemis programs.
Right, for the moon mission itself then. Dr. Kang, what more can you share with us about the possible contributions that South Korea can make to the Artemis program?
Among the participating countries in Artemis Accords, there are countries where the private sector is involving right now. For example, like a space launch system is developed by the Boeing in the US, and Space Lander is also developed by the SpaceX. And Japan also signed a research agreement with the developing rover, the Lunar rover, with the JAXA and Toyota. That rover is equipped with the pressurized facilities. Unfortunately, the Korea actually recently joined the Artemis Accords last May, so we don't have a clear role at this point. But as Professor Yu mentioned, the Danuri, for example, ShadowCam is also looking for the manned landing site for the Artemis program.
That's correct. Yep.
So we are actually contributing indirectly for the Artemis program, and I think there might be a chance to still possibilities for participating in the Artemis program for the Lunar Gateway through the working level consultations with the NASA. NASA is also open for the Korea's role in the construction of the Lunar Gateway right now, and it can be discussed according to the consultation with NASA. For example, like making the hydrogen as an energy part, and making food for the space food and so on. So, so right now we're contributing indirectly for the Artemis mission currently.
Right, I see. Professor Yoon, as Dr. Kang mentioned, the payload, the ShadowCam, NASA's ShadowCam on Tanuri, it's looking for potential landing sites on the moon for NASA. I understand that NASA and China may be eyeing the same landing spots on the moon itself. Is this reality a source of concern, or do you see perhaps this as signaling the start of constructive communication between the two on the next frontier?
That's a good question. It's a pretty difficult question to answer, but I think both the United States and China signed the outer space treaties, which kind of guide how to use the moon and then other celestial bodies for peaceful purpose. So currently NASA is keeping the lines of communication open with the Beijing's, including the issue of safe space flight.
Right. So hopefully we're keeping our fingers crossed for constructive dialogue between the two then. Yes. Dr. Kang, some pundits believe that more should be done perhaps to hammer out international consensus on space exploration itself before seeking to harness lunar resources. What are your thoughts?
Of course, if the Cold War was the only factor driving the reason to go to the moon back in 1970s, the reason we are trying to go to the moon these days are totally different. That's because possibly potential availability of the moon, I think. So resources like helium-3 or the rare earth elements, which were once not essential for back in 1970s. As the science and technology developed, those helium-3 and the rare earth elements getting very precious and more precious. So we're looking back into the moon, and then all of the attention is back into the moon. So right now, after 50 years back from the last moon landing, we're trying to go to the moon right now, and then in order to handle this, the space registrations, the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs will therefore take the necessary steps for depending on the technology and development of the space exploration, I think.
Right, and in the meantime then, Professor Yoon, what more can you tell us about the potential of lunar resources?
That's right. I think Dr. Kang pointed out pretty importantly, two elements. I think helium-3 and then rare earth elements. And it has also other elements too, but I want to highlight those two, elaborate a bit more. Helium-3 is, we could use helium-3 to generate clean energies through nuclear fusions rather than nuclear fissions.
Right.
So that's very important. That's, I think, our dream kind of the energy source for the future of humanity. Also, rare earth elements, it causes a lot of also pollutions on Earth when you kind of exploit it. So moon has a significant amount of rare earth elements, so we could use that one for making all the electrical devices, including your smartphones. And also, I think another very important element, the resource the moon has is the water. Water is common on Earth, but water can be used for obviously if you want to let, for human settlement on the moon, astronauts need to drink, so we need water. But also, if you can, water is a H2O, so which is two hydrogen elements, atoms, and then the oxygen's atoms are made of waters. We could split them. Then what do you get? Oxygen definitely for breathing for astronaut. We could use that. But also, hydrogen can be used for fuels, for rocket fuels. Oxygen can be used for propellants. Furthermore, I think Korea maybe can contribute. I think Dr. Kang mentioned earlier that fuel cell, which can power by using the hydrogen and then oxygens. So I think potentially that could power lunar facilities. So I think that might be the area that I think Korea can contribute.
Right. And how soon are we looking at this kind of plan? Like we're talking about space mining at this point. And how soon in the near future can we expect to have these elements back here on Earth for use?
That's a very good question.
Right.
I'm not quite sure, but I think first of all, so I think we need to watch how the Artemis program is keep going, right? So I think Artemis 1 now, we know that tomorrow, NASA is going to try out again. So that's the first step. I think we are planning out Artemis 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We continually then we settle down. Then I think we could maybe exploit it. And then I think we could use that elements for lunar settlement, but also maybe we could possibly bring back to the Earth for our use.
Right, I see. Yeah. Meanwhile, Doctor, Kang, space debris is already emerging
Yes.
as a problem. What are some possible countermeasures to tackle space debris, do you think?
Space debris is currently a real concern for that could impact the space launch vehicles these days. That's why the timeline of the Artemis has been different from the morning time to the afternoon time in the local time right now. So it is being recognized as an essential factor for deciding launch windows these days. And despite the fact that several concepts, including the use of the nets to collect the space debris, or magnets can be other way to collect the space debris. But they have been developed and tested, but there are still many steps to complete before the practical way to use it right now. So to avoid becoming the space debris these days for the satellite and the space launch vehicles, they have their own ways to escape or go down to the Earth again to burn out, not to be a space debris themselves.
Right, I see. Professor Yun, going back to the Artemis program itself, what are the prospects of sending astronauts to the moon again within this particular decade?
Okay, so I think it's very positive. I think this Saturday, tomorrow, the rocket space launching systems and then the Orion spacecraft on the top of it will take off. We're going to try that out. If that succeeds, 2 years later, 2024, this time we're gonna put the astronaut on the Orion spacecraft. So they will actually, they're not gonna land, but they're gonna circumnavigate and come back to the Earth. So once that succeeds, 2025, we are going to try to land the astronaut on the moons. So once that succeeds, we're gonna try to continually land on the moon while building lunar gate, and then building also lunar habitat. So that's the plans.
Right, so ultimately the Artemis One focuses on going to the moon perhaps and then coming back safely. Is that the mission for Artemis
Yes.
One?
Right.
Yes.
Right, I see. Dr. Kang, South Korea plans to land its own spacecraft on the moon by the year 2030. How feasible is this particular plan?
I think that possibility is quite likely. So that's because although the timeline could be delayed, Korea's technology to make launch vehicle is now very improved. And we also succeeded from the Naro launch vehicle to the Nuri launch vehicle, and we successfully launched the Nuri space launch vehicle this June. So in the 2030s, assuming there are no political issues with the sufficient funding, we will be able to launch a Lunar Explorer as well as a lander with our own space launch vehicle. I think that's quite feasible and we have a high possibility to send the moon our own power.
Good to know. Professor Yun, Artemis One is taking off, as you mentioned, this
Right.
coming Saturday. Do you foresee a successful launch this time around? Because it had been postponed.
That's right. That's a good question. So if it's ready, it'll take off. But if we find more issues, then we'll fix it. I think that's the purpose of test flying. So I think it's not a matter of doing it tomorrow or not, but we continually find out trouble, we all fix it, and then eventually, after all, the purpose of test flying is the securing a safe flight. So whether we make it tomorrow or we find more issues, that's a progress.
Right. And Dr. Kang, what look to be the broader implications, perhaps, of a successful Artemis One mission?
As Professor Yu mentioned, the safe manned mission to the moon is the ultimate goal for the Artemis One project right now. The entire procedure has to be safely replicated on the Artemis One, such as for the Artemis 2, the astronauts will be on the Orion spacecraft. So before we sending the astronaut, everything has to be checked up. So if there's no problem for the Artemis 1, for 2 years later, we will sending the astronauts for safely. So even though Artemis 1 mission will be a great success if it completes all tasks and accurately without making any mistake, but if there is glitch or something like that, that will be still the good to know that before we're sending the astronauts inside of the Artemis One. So either, I mean, Artemis One could, I want to say that Artemis One will be always successful because if there is a successful and we're safe to send the astronauts for the Artemis 2 program, and then if there is find a way to make a problem and there's a time to fix the problem before sending the astronauts. So Artemis 1 is very important, and either way, I think it will be successful.
Right.
Yeah.
Professor Yoon, I understand that the Artemis program itself ultimately seeks to pave a path to Mars. Tell us a bit about that. Why is that important?
So NASA is planning out, this is what the big story, NASA last 20 years. We learned so much about how to live in space at the International Space Station. So now all this knowledge, and now we're heading to the moon. So once we get more knowledge, how we survive, how we live on the space, and then we plan to send man around next maybe 2030s or 2040s. So that's a kind of NASA's big plan. So we'll see.
We'll keep our fingers crossed for
That's
that.
right.
Then.
Yes.
And Dr. Kang, I was wondering, how do you respond to potential criticism against, that is, space exploration? There are people who cite about the problems we face here in Earth and then talk about the investments, the heavy investments made in space for space exploration. How do you respond to such criticism? Space
exploration is always cost a lot of money, like for all the countries. And then even though, like, if you think about the young child, if you think about the young child, you don't need like a house or something like that. But if you're grown up, you may need a lot of you need cars or housings and everything. It's more like that. Like if the people, if the country is getting advanced, getting advanced countries, they need more, and then they have a high chance to go further to explore or to develop such their duties or something like that. So. To invest in space exploration is the proof that we are in the advanced country, and then as you invest more in the developed country, in the space exploration, they will prove that we are we are going to be the leading countries for the space explorations.
Right, and staying with that, Professor Yoon, do you believe there is more that can be done from the part of the government to perhaps better strengthen or better invest in our plans to further our space exploration?
Yeah, space exploration. So NASA's, one of the key plan is what through the space exploration, try to vitalizing the economies. So so I think NASA is what, for example, like SpaceX, the government is helping out to the company like a SpaceX to grow up. So they're actually making a profit. So that's a good example. So I think just like the next 20, 30, 40 years, space will be a pretty important part of the economy. So it's a good idea that government use enough funding so that a lot of our commercial sector grow up in space.
Right, so ultimately it would lead to economic security for us as well.
I think so too, yeah.
Right, all right then, Professor Yoon, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today. And
thank you so
Dr.
much.
Kang, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much.